Thank you very much for your great presentation, Julius and Shahar. Now I call you by first name. So let's start our question and answer session. Please raise a hand and please mention your name and your affiliation. So any question from the floor? Yes, Isobe-sensei.
Okay, my name is Hiroaki Isobe from GSAIS, and thank you very much for your excellent talks. I'm very much enjoyed. Well, I don't really enjoy hearing about the disasters, but anyway. So my question is that you mentioned why you are more focused on anthropogenic risks technologies, and I understand that because it's more likeliness to happen, and we have more things to do to prevent and mitigate the risks. On the other hand, this natural disaster, which is rare, say 1 in 1,000. For those disasters, we definitely know that it happens. So, and for example, this the big earthquake in 2011, that was said that that scale of earthquake occurs 1 in 1,000 years. And we are, in Japan now, we are preparing for it. So now we think that 1 in 1,000 years risks are something we do care. So I just want to hear something more about what kind of activity you are doing in this regard, the natural disasters.
Should we both reply, or do you want me to start? Wonderful. The question of prioritization is a very important question. It's very widely debated among scholars of existential risk. I think it's not a zero-sum game. It's not necessarily that we have to take away attention and resources from research into conventional disasters in order to conduct reasonable research on existential risk. Quite to the contrary, I think that research on conventional disasters, and Japan here, with very good reasons, is at the forefront of much of this research, can help us understand the development of global catastrophic risks, particularly as they're cascading and worsening. There are two very strong arguments for the prioritization of existential risks, and these arguments are firstly that there's almost no research done on existential risk. So it comes down to multiplying probability and impact. And the philosopher Nick Bostrom has a very interesting paper on prioritization, where he not only points out that there are several hundred times more research papers on a certain kind of beetle, the dung beetle, than on human extinction, but he also points out that the number of lives we lose by human extinction is just so many times higher than the value of all our lives on this planet right now combined, that if you do the maths rationally, in theory, we would have to dedicate a whole lot of resources to existential risk.
Yes, I would add to that. Part of what we're trying to achieve with this classification system is to pivot the attention from looking at specific risk scenarios. We definitely still need to do that. But to some extent, when the risk is established, precisely when there is a historical record, there is likely to be an academic discipline dedicated to it. It could be our job to dedicate more resources to those disciplines compared to, say, other activities, but that's a trade-off that academia is already somewhat familiar with. What we're trying to highlight particularly with the critical life support systems, is areas where we can build resilience across the board. And that resilience would help both in the existential risk case and in natural disaster cases. If our food network, for example, or our transit network is robust to existential risks, by and by it is also resilient to smaller localized risks.
Second question?
My name is Tateo Arimoto, a National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies, Tokyo. And my experience, I have been serving these 3 years, a co-chairperson of the OECD project about the scientific advice, mean the interface, the science and policy making, including the disaster prevention, disaster measures. So upon that experiences, co-chairperson including the Robin Grime, your country is the chief science advisor for foreign minister. He is the nuclear engineer. Our experience is just comments. You stress expand your networks, not only the academic circle, but also the industries and international organization. But our side, the network is expanding the United Nations, of course, and the UNESCO, and the OECD, and the ICSU, International Science Council, as well as the APEC, and particularly you should pay attention more the such kind of the conventional, conventional disasters. Anyway, so Julia talking about the Sendai framework. So you remember the Sendai framework stressed the interface, strengthen the interface, the science, and the policy making. That is very, very important to make the prevention and the disaster, yes, including the horizon scanning. So just my comments is your Bosnia Martinez is very world famous astronomist, but also the former Royal Society president. So he has a lot of the connection worldwide. Such as I mentioned, the other organizations. My comments at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kazuhashi from Hitotsubashi University. My question is as follows. When you identify the risk and when you identify how to mitigate and prevent it, do you investigate sort of how you give an incentive, political incentive or say economical incentive to the people to indeed conduct on that prevention or mitigation? Because usually we can easily find a lot of conflict of interest and can't do something good. Say a simple example is nuclear weapons, abolishment of nuclear weapons, and also climate change. And say for the tsunami case, some old literature says that the big tsunami came somewhere here, but many people are living just on the shore. So it seems to me it's very difficult to, sometimes it's very difficult to give that kind of incentive. So I'm wondering what you are doing about that, or thinking about that.
Shall I start? Okay. Thank you very much. I think you've raised a very, very important point. The economic side of this is very difficult. We've mentioned how it's difficult to get people assign resources, allocate resources to such kind of research. There is a political problem, but there's also clearly the economic problem. Now, neither of us are economists, but we are fortunate to have an economist in our team, Sir Partha Dasgupta, who is an expert on problems of environmental economics. And in a way, there are some similarities between the problem of environmental economics and the economics of existential risk. Let me say that we are looking closely at various players we could get on board for this. One kind of player we want to get on board for this is the reinsurance industry. Not that the reinsurance industry would be interested in insuring anybody against existential risk, because there wouldn't be any insurance left. No, but it's particularly the reinsurers that do have an interest in economic resilience, in robust risk financing mechanisms, and I think we can learn from them, and I think they would be interested in this kind of activity.
Yeah, so if Julius took the macro incentive side, I will take the micro incentive side, which is something that we're trying to do in various ways. So, even before you get people out there to agree on what needs to be done, you need to get the academics in the same room to agree on what needs to be done. And that also requires understanding their incentives. And often that means finding a grant proposal that they can all collaborate on, and then you get a lot more buy-in. And so for many of the places where we try to have some meaningful impact, we do some work on mapping out what is the incentive structure operating around the people who are in the field, and how might we play that? For example, in climate change, the main issue is to take the people who are already doing good work and providing them with more resources. So we have launched some workshops on how you might use machine learning to empower climate science, maybe make it more directly relevant, maybe construct it more as a product for decision makers, people who are already doing good work, bringing that work out into the world. I don't think there are going to be global answers to this. It's just from taking a very deep interdisciplinary approach to mapping out the incentives around each particular player is how we make progress.
Thank you very much.
More questions? Oh, this is again. Yeah. Oh, you had a question? So I didn't see. Okay. After you and yeah.
Well, can I? All right.
Yeah.
Yes. Actually, this is a question for both of you as well as Professor Ohashi, because you mentioned about the insurance. So for conventional disasters, we have insurance. For major asteroid impact, which wipe out everything, we can't have an insurance. So there must be some threshold above which you can't have, never ever have an insurance to mitigate things. So I think that threshold can be regarded as a threshold for the existential risk. So I think in the theory of insurance, do you have any theory to put some threshold above which we can't do anything by insurance? No? You don't? Okay. And what about your side? Have you got any thought of threshold above which you call it an existential risk?
Okay. So how many of you are familiar with the case of false vacuum collapse? False vacuum collapse is a hypothetical existential risk that says there are sort of fundamental quantum fields, they permeate the entire universe. If they are not at their ground state, energy could be gained from switching to the ground state. It is possible that one of these fields is not in its ground state. We could explore it, but there is nothing to do about it, even if we realize that this might happen. Right? This is the kind of existential risk where there is no prevention and no mitigation.
Sure. Yeah. As a physicist, I knew that concept, but I didn't think that you mentioned that one. Okay, thank you.
So the questions, Kevin, did you have a question? No? Oh, okay. Yes.
Thank you very much. Probably during my presentation, I will discuss it's a similar question, how to prioritize those wide variety of the different sources of the disaster, because you made a three-dimensional table, and this is fancy. However, when you're discussing each individual type of the disaster, it's a wide variety of the differentiation. And I'm very keen that Dr. Hawking, who is sitting in the group, and how he can advise, because he's also more warning about the embedding from the alien into the Earth, and he was seriously considering about that kind of risk also. And I'm very keen, how can you evaluate or logically with the huge variety of the different sources of it's a real existence stance of the disaster. However, how can you structuralize these into the fine table? And that is.
Well, I'm sure, Shahar, you have something very good to say in response to
Yes.
this.
Well, I don't know if I have anything very good, but I will try. Let's tackle alien invasion head on, right? So it's in numerous disaster movies. You have some theoretical arguments that they might be out there, and you can push those theoretical arguments to what might happen if they get here. Very little evidence, very little good science to really give you the probabilities, because we don't know fully how life originated on Earth. We know some essential factors. We don't have a full understanding of xenobiology, so we don't know what life could be out there. So, I mean, this could be argued in many different directions, and it's very hard to find conclusive arguments. So you might adopt the precautionary principle and think that something like METI, which is broadcasting very loudly to the universe that we are here, is unwise, even if no one is listening, because if someone is listening, the chances of it going well might be not as high as the chances of it going bad. But I want to talk about maybe a nearby disaster that has been more carefully studied theoretically, and that is the risk from future artificial intelligence, okay? Right? Because here we also have purely mere theoretical arguments, right? We don't know if such technology could ever be achieved. There are some interesting arguments going both ways. Increasingly, we are seeing those arguments becoming more and more grounded. So people are trying to find substantive analogies with how the human brain works. People are trying to do very careful studies on the precise rate of improvement in machine learning technologies, and trying to, I mean, as far as can be, limit the uncertainty bounds on some of these technologies, while at the same time providing the kind of arguments that if the technology arrived, never mind whether it will arrive and when it will arrive, it might go more badly than it would be a good thing, as in the case of aliens. And in the same case, right, we can't say how does this prioritize versus other risks in terms of how much resources we should be putting into it, but it can help us make decisions, right, in the same way that saying broadcasting our existence is maybe not a very good idea. Maybe pushing head-on capabilities in artificial intelligence without ever thinking about how to design these technologies in a safe and controllable manner is not a very good idea. And this is an actionable piece of advice that we can use, even if it doesn't, shift lots of money around. It could shift institutional design in quite significant ways in key places.
Maybe I can add to that again from a more macro perspective. I am in no position to judge the competence of any of those people involved with CSER with regard to existential risk. And I would argue nobody can, because we're talking about something nobody knows. And we're just starting this field. It's a very new academic field. We're starting to develop it. We're exploring it. And as long as the contributions to the discussion are serious and well-meaning and do not increase these risks, I think we welcome any serious contribution to the discussion. Moreover, with the aim of academic engineering in mind, the aim of creating connections, the aim of talking to policy and industry people, I think people like Stephen Hawking can open doors to very important and very interesting people who have other things to contribute to the debate. And therefore, I think we're very, very happy to have him on board.
Any question? We haven't heard any question from students, maybe. It doesn't have to be a student, but there? Okay.
Thank you very much. I'm second year student of this graduate school, GSAIS, Yugo Tanaka. I would like to ask about the relationship with your institute and industry. In some aspect, risk and benefit is the both sides of the same thing. And business in industry, from the industrial view, you need to take some risks to get some benefits. And obviously, our society has benefited from taking risks, such kind of risks, and that may be the cause of the existential risks you're focusing on. And industries tend to pursue short-term profit in the sacrifice of existential risks, in the sacrifice of those who may suffer from such kind of risks. And what is your strategy to make those industries participate in your program? This is my questions.
I think Julius will give you a better answer, but let me start by saying one thing is industry is not one thing, right? You take any particular company, it's not one holistic entity either. There are many groups within them. Some of them tend to have longer term planning. Some of them have, care very much about risk, either because they are just altruistically motivated and they have some power to do something about it, or because they're cynical and they want the brand that comes with being responsible, or because there are issues of liability that drive them to consider risks. And so, for very large industries, it is often possible to find corners within those industries that do consider these areas. And we can collaborate first with them, create a form of a beachhead from which we can expand the conversation, maybe ask what kind of resources or research would enable them to push a risk-aware agenda in the industry that they are in. Another thing is, particularly with emergent technologies, the people who are going to be in industry pushing those technologies are currently in academia and in science, developing the very nascent prototypes. Academia still has very strong norms of altruism and public good, and so starting those conversations early, when the technology is still in the lab rather than in a company or a startup, hopefully we can continue having those conversations even as very large sums of money come in and the board comes in and sort of the push towards the short-term revenue is ever present. We can still have those kind of relationships. But yes, it is an issue we need to be aware of. Julius, anything to add?
Yes. I think there are a number of aspects. I think Shahar has already highlighted that I think there are a lot of situations in which industries have a very own interest in exploring these issues. And what we see right now going on, for instance, with regard to artificial intelligence, there's a lot of movement in the industry, a lot of consciousness and interest in exchange. You've also mentioned a very, very fundamental problem we have in our economic systems, in our way of capitalism, is that there are huge incentives for externalities, and basically making profits in many industries is through creating externalities. So of course, I think with regard to existential risk, but with regard to any other environmental challenge, we'll have to aim at reducing these externalities. One particular thing with regard to regulatory reformation that me and many other people are thinking about is the concept of the corporation. Because you know that under corporate law, the corporation as a legal person shields the shareholders from liability. While that is a very good thing to promote our economy, and it has been so for several hundred years, the question is whether we should have limited liability corporations for economic activities that are inherently dangerous. And I think you in Japan, again, you have a very, very interesting example with Tokyo Denroku. And with the problems that arise when you have a limited liability company which distributes profits on an annual basis to the shareholders, but is unable to bear its financial liabilities and the huge externalities that are created. So what I would raise is we should seriously reconsider whether we allow inherently dangerous activities to be undertaken under the corporate veil of a legal person. Because what I believe as a lawyer is that liability, both financial and, that is to say, civil liability, as well as criminal liability, that is something that can really create incentives. That is something that can really create deterring effects. And I think for some kind of activities, maybe it's worth considering relying on that more.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we have to finish our keynote session. Thank you so much again for very thought-provoking and great lecture on your new framework on risk. Thank you again.
Thank you.